Hi, everyone. Welcome to the House of Lou podcast. I'm your host, Veronica Theodoro. I'm so glad you're here. This episode of House of Lou is supported by Cardinals Nation. Today, I'm talking to two friends about their experience working with interior designers. My guests are Pia Koster and Sydney Loughran Wolf. Both women have incredible taste, and their homes are beautiful and truly reflect who they are. But hiring a designer played a big role in creating the look and feel of their spaces. We're going to hear all about their journey with design, and I can't wait to get into the details, dispel some of the myths of working with a designer, and learn about the process so that we can all feel a little less intimidated about seeking professional advice about our homes. But before we get started, here's what's been going on in and around my house. Before I'm joined by my guests, I thought I'd share some kernels of wisdom I've picked up from my own experience working with an interior designer for the past 3 or 4 years. The first thing I'll say is that most people are actually pretty surprised to find out that I work with a designer. It must be because of what I do for a living, but covering design is nowhere near the same as designing a room or a house. So I have had a wonderfully positive experience, and I really value my designer's opinion and just really trust and appreciate the way that she's taken the time to translate my vision for the house into the design. So here we go. I began the overhaul of my living room during the COVID years, as some of you may remember. And I learned fairly quickly that with the long lead times and all the other challenges that we were dealing with, I really just needed to be patient. This is not my strong suit, let's say. But even in the best of circumstances, I just think it's going to save you a lot of angst to simply just surrender to the process because it does take more time. You know, you want to keep in mind you're just not buying something off the rack, so to speak. You're likely customizing a sofa or you're adding detail to your window treatments. And you know what? These things just don't happen overnight. The next piece of advice is to really just be honest about your budget. Let your designer know upfront how much you're willing to spend on a particular piece of furniture or whatever it is that you're shopping for. I was guilty early on of holding back a bit because I felt like I was a little nervous about costs and so forth. But what I realized was that we were wasting a lot of time going back and forth and, looking at new selections to see like what would stand out to me until I realized that to get what I really wanted, I needed to be willing to pay for it, frankly. And so I made some adjustments in the budget and we got the sofa that I really love. And so just be honest about what you're able to budget for particular line items that will save you a lot of frustration. At the same time, obviously, it never makes sense to present an unrealistic budget that will just be a recipe for frustration. So around this time last year, we started working on my dining room, and I was working against a deadline. I wanted the room finished in time for my daughter's graduation party. Well, long story short is that I rushed and selected a chandelier that, looking back, I can't believe I ever selected it in the first place. Well, I knew I had made a mistake the minute I saw it hanging in the room. And lighting, I think, is one of the most challenging design elements to get right. So in the end, we were fortunate to be able to return the fixture, and I eventually selected something that I really love. But I didn't have it in time for the party. And you know what? It was no big deal. And lastly, there are times when your designer is going to make a suggestion and it might catch you off guard, okay? And what I would say is take the time to consider it. My designer told me that we just needed to repaint the dining room. The original color was not right. It never occurred to me that we were going to start at that point. But you know what? She was 100% right. And I am so glad I took the time to really think about what she was proposing. The new color is so beautiful, so lovely, and it really makes the room. On the other hand, I decided to repurpose an old secretary of ours and make it into a bar. I had it stripped down to its natural wood and I thought it looked great. I spent weeks thinking about this. I did all of this without really talking it over with my designer. And I was, of course, nervous about making a mistake, but I really wanted to repurpose this piece of furniture. Well, it turned out beautifully. I'll post a photo to the show notes. And, she loves it too. So my advice is listen to the professionals, okay? But if you really love something and if you feel strongly, go with your gut. We'll be right back. Hey, Cardinals fans, get game day ready with the Cardinals Nation pregame party. Before every home game, enjoy a DJ-hosted pep rally-style party featuring a full buffet and an all-inclusive bar. It's the best way to get excited before the first pitch. Get your tickets today at cardinals.com/pregame. All right, everyone, let's get started and welcome my guests, Pia and Sydney. Hi, ladies. Great to see you. Welcome to House of Lou.
Hi, how are you? Thank you. Hello.
I have to tell you, I spent a lot of time thinking about who to invite onto this episode. And it actually was not easy to come up with people who I think really love the home, love interiors, and definitely have incredible taste, but also feel like they need the assistance of a professional in their home. So thank you so much for being here. And I'm so excited to get started with our conversation. Let's go back a little bit. I want to know if either of you grew up in a home that was designed by a professional designer or decorator, because I do think that that tends to influence how we think about it as adults. Sydney, why don't you take it?
I did not grow up in a home that was done by an interior designer. My mother was an art major, though, and she just has an eye. I mean, she would have people do the curtains or upholster the furniture, but she would pick all of the elements herself. And she just has that ability to recognize what will go with what, visualize how it will look in a space. I'm not sure that growing up I understood maybe that it was all so tastefully and beautifully and well done. But as I got older, I realized, when you'd go visit friends' houses, oh, I really live in a beautiful home. And then then you have that revelation, oh, really, this is my mother's doing. So it was lovely, but that was thanks to her and her innate talent.
Pia, how about you?
I did not grow up in a home that was professionally decorated. My mom was, like Sydney's, she would put it all together, but I don't know that she knew what the resources were that were out there. So she was a retail person's favorite client because she would walk into a furniture store and just say, help me and do this. And somehow it just all ended up working. Through the years, she would acquire different pieces and she and her friends would talk about where to go and where to shop. And it was really just the way she acquired her wardrobe.
Wonderful. And so I'm curious, how did the two of you decide to reach out to an interior designer to help you in your home? What was that process like?
It was scary. I was a little scared. I was scared of not being able to stay within a budget or picking out something that they might think, oh, that's tacky and all of that. But I knew at a certain point that I was just overwhelmed and I was afraid of making a decision, an expensive decision. And so I started researching and asking friends what they do, who they use, where they shop. And it sort of went through there. I've not always had the same designer. So you live and you learn and the relationship develops, and sometimes it runs its course. Not that it's good or bad, but it's just you kind of pause with any project and then you restart and say, do I want to do things differently?
And Sydney, how about you? How did you decide to hire a designer? I know that you lived in your house for a few years before you took that next step to have it professionally decorated.
Yeah, I would say it was unlike my mother. I don't have that ability to visualize how it's all going to look together, badly. And I knew that my house looked all right, but it wasn't really the home that I wanted to make it into. And we had made a decision that my husband had taken a new job. We had committed to St. Louis for the foreseeable future. And the two largest spaces on our first floor, our living room and our den, just needed an overhaul. It wasn't sort of a fix here, a fix there. It was really an overhaul. And I had been a guest at a party at an acquaintance's home, and she had the whole first floor open to the guests. So I walked around, and every single room was stunning and just not just beautifully done, but it had maybe a really interesting flourish or something that was eye-catching or different or fun. Like she had a crocodile embossed leather wallpaper on the ceiling in her library.
Oh, wow.
And I was just sort of floored by that. It was so neat and eye-catching and fun.
Glamorous, yeah.
Yeah. So I asked her who the name of her interior designer was. She shared it with me, and I made a mental note and made a point of not forgetting that name. So fast forward to this stage where we needed to redo these two rooms, and she was the first person I called. But I agree with Pia. It was a little intimidating to make that call and to welcome this person who you know has this great style into your home and say, look at my space that's so desperately in need of help.
Right. What was that conversation like when you are meeting with the designer for the first time and you're perhaps sharing your vision or the details that inspire you?
She made it really lovely. She was warm and she was sincere, and she asked really good questions that teased out, I think, really well the sort of scope of the project that we envisioned or hoped for. Maybe even better than I could have anticipated articulating it, just based on the kinds of questions she was asking. And I really appreciated, so I'm very sentimental. I had a number of antiques I wanted to hang on to and just sort of figure out a different way of using them. There was a set of curtains in the living room I wanted to reuse, but I recognized that they needed to be rehung. But they were new and they were in great shape and they were pretty. She was willing to work with all of these, sort of, I guess, idiosyncrasies, and she made me feel like she was more than open to that, was totally good with that, and was going to come up with some neat room that was a combination of these things that were mandates for me and new ideas.
So you really felt like she was open to your point of view. I think that that's something that people who perhaps haven't had the experience of working with an interior designer often think, oh no, this means that the things that I love or my taste is going to somehow take a back seat to what the interior designer wants. And so, Pia, can you talk to us a little bit about how you communicated to your designer the things you wanted to keep in the home, or your vision or your taste, really? And how did you make sure that all of that came across in your meetings with her?
I just want to add that I think it is a red flag if a designer really wants to just come in and get rid of everything and start fresh.
100%.
Because a home is layers and layers of, what you've acquired from either a grandmother that's passed it down, or you bought it on a trip and it's so sentimental. So I would say, and I've been fortunate that the people I've chose to work with are more than willing to either keep a piece or repurpose. I had an interesting situation where we had purchased a home that we were going to gut completely. And so the designer met at our current home and walked through that. But the walkthrough was, okay, I don't want that. I don't want this. I was coming from a home that we had lived in with the kids really small, and everything was jewel tone. And I'm trying to tell her, I was like, this is not going to convey what my taste is, because now I want to go more neutral and serene. And she actually said, she goes, I see this a lot, that,
Interesting.
that people, what they have currently, they want to totally flip. And it has to happen in a progressive way. So we first sat there and I sort of told her what my vision was, what I wanted to change, items I wanted to keep. And that was very important to me. So she sort of went through and actually flagged them like, okay, this, and took notes. And then we went straight from there and walked through the new space. And that was very important to me for her to help me with that, because she could visualize this empty space with all my old and all the new. And that's one thing that I just could not do. I'm okay with looking at a space right now, like my family room, and saying, oh, we need to refresh this, or let's get rid of this piece and move it over there. But an empty space and trying to visualize all these components coming together is not my forte. So she was really great. She asked a lot of questions. I asked a lot of questions. I think the more input I gave her, the more appreciative she was. And she was going out to, markets in Atlanta and traveling. And I knew I was always in the back of her head because she'd be texting me pictures. She had all the measurements and she would be able to say, what about this piece in this little spot? And she had floor plans and it was wonderful.
How did the two of you develop your taste, or what resources did you look at in order to communicate what you wanted for the house?
I love Architectural Digest. I still read the magazine.
Me too.
And I think it's so inspirational, aspirational. And then I have freelance written for Veronica in the past. And when I started doing that, I discovered Pinterest as a research tool.
Yes.
Initially, and I would create files to help me get an idea of the aesthetic for whatever it was I was about to interview someone about. And then after a while, I realized, wait a minute, Pinterest is amazing. I can use this for all kinds of things. And I started creating and keeping files for things for me personally, including things like fabrics and wallpapers, furniture, rooms even, or gardens. I mean, I had all kinds of folders. So when it came time to work with this designer, I made my poor husband sit down and go through relevant files with me and say yes or no to everything, because I had already vetted it. And so then when he would say yes, I'd move it into a separate file. And then I shared those with her vis-a-vis Pinterest. And she looked through them thoroughly. And then she asked a lot of questions. And she said, I see patterns. I see trends. You tend to like this. You tend to like that. You don't seem to have any of this in there or any of that in there. And she was spot on in articulating, I guess, all of that. And so that was sort of how I went about figuring out for myself and sharing with her what my style, if you will, was.
Was there something about the process of working with an interior designer that surprised you?
I would say how collaborative it is.
Okay.
I really do think that they do appreciate providing all, not just sending them into a vacuum of how would you do this space. I think they want to know what you like, colors. I remember one designer, I don't know who it was, asking me, what were your kitchen cabinets growing up? And I said, they were dark wood. And she goes, you're not going to like dark wood, which I thought was an interesting thing. And I said, you're exactly right. I don't. Like, I wanted something brighter and lighter.
There's so much psychology to interiors, right? That you don't realize until you start really thinking about it. I'm wondering how you handled challenges, because no matter how great the relationship is, there's always going to be a moment where perhaps you disagree about something, or there's a question about cost, or the designer wants to perhaps go in one direction and you maybe feel differently about that. Can you talk about an instance where there was challenge in the relationship and how you worked through it?
I would say the two challenges that really stand out, both were handled relatively well. One maybe less to my satisfaction, but one was these beautiful chairs that she had ordered for our living room. And they were this really neat deep seat and interesting shape. And she'd put like a navy facing on the front and then this really neat navy and white chinoiserie on the back. I think it was a Schumacher pattern. And she had them made and upholstered in North Carolina. And whoever put them on the truck to come to us, put them up against something that was sharp. So every time the truck went over a bump, it sliced them open further.
Oh my God.
So they arrived totally open in the back, like cut open. I mean, they had to be totally reupholster on the back. So she opened that conversation, that bad news with, let me start by saying, we're going to fix this. This is on us, which I was relieved about because that was going to have to be the next thing out of my mouth was that's not, we can't absorb that cost. That's not our fault. And she was totally gracious about it, said that right from the get-go. But it delayed the delivery by like a month and a half.
Right.
And so I don't know that it was so much something that I had to handle in terms of a negotiation as it was, you have to have a lot of patience. Tia, I don't know if you would agree, but you definitely, I think it's optimal to not have a timeline because these strange things will happen that you have no control over. And in some instances, she doesn't either. And if I had needed those chairs by a deadline, that would have been really
Right.
problematic. But I was able to go with the flow. It wasn't great to wait another month and a half.
But you got what you wanted.
We got what we wanted. She completely fixed it. And then the other one was probably handled a little less to my satisfaction. Was we have a really big space over our fireplace in the den. And we wanted a piece of artwork there, single piece of artwork there. And she suggested photography and thought we should look through some photos from a trip we had taken to Patagonia and pick one of those. And then she would work with a special guy and have it blown up and framed in this super cool lucite frame. And I love the whole idea of that. But as I looked through those photos, I realized I didn't want something super specific in its representation of time and place. So that every time you looked at that art, or that photography, you would think of that one moment in time. Mm-hmm. I realized what I really wanted was something with a little bit more of an air of mystery that maybe let your mind wander. So we sort of talked about how we were going to sort of pivot and try to find a piece together that was just naturalistic photography from a good photographer. And we went through a few iterations of that, never quite found something that all three of us, my husband and the decorator and I, loved. And I think she just started, we were nearing the end of the whole scope of the project. And I think she just started to maybe lose some steam or she felt like things were wrapping up. So she pivoted again and presented some graphic modern art that was bright and fun and attractive, but not exactly what my husband and I had envisioned. And maybe out of just the fact that we had just been doing this for a while, we'd been going at this particular issue for a while, we all agreed to it. And we said it would be a placeholder, but it's still on the wall to this day. And I like it, but it's not exactly what I wanted. And I think I should have pushed a little harder. Looking back, I probably should have pushed a little harder to just keep on keeping on until we found whatever that piece would have been.
And I think you're right, though, about being patient, especially with art. I think art, it just takes time to really find something that you connect with. So I think, just see what happens, right? Like maybe on one of your trips, you'll find something or you'll discover something. So not all is lost. Pia, how about you? Was there a time that felt especially challenging to you in the process?
I think it was sort of coming to practical senses. I was at a time where my kids were little. I think I shared this with you, and we were going over floor coverings. And she had found this beautiful, beautiful antique rug in Atlanta. And she was trying to convince me to buy it. And it's an investment piece. And you'll have it forever. You'll hand it down to your kids. And I said, my kids are little and this is going to get damaged. And I don't want any room to feel like, don't go in there in case something happens. My friends drink red wine, or I want people to be able to walk into all of our spaces. And if something happens, the party can go on. And she said, but no, you're going to really, really love this. And as she is saying it, my then 3 or 4-year-old comes roller skating with a box size Sharpie in her hand, like through the house. And we're in this room. And I said, that is why we cannot buy this rug. Let's go Sisal. And then we'll revisit in 10 years.
Yes. And I think it's just important, right, to feel that level of comfort with whoever you're working with, that you can be honest and you can say whatever it is that you're feeling, right, so you don't feel stifled. So I would say that's one of the main takeaways is feel comfortable with the person who you're hiring. I'd love to hear about a favorite selection that the designer made for your home, and perhaps it was a little out of your comfort zone, but boy, do you just love it.
I mean, it's something small,
Yeah.
and it wasn't in any of my Pinterest files, anything like this. But she talked us into this crazy Audubon-like butterfly fabric for the cushions on the club chairs in the living room on opposite sides of the couch. And it was really out there for us, but we kind of liked it. And I would never have picked this on my own. And we went with it. And then she put this wild, this is going to sound so strange, red and white sort of double helix patterned tape around the perimeter of the cushions. And it's so cool. And I love it. And then she put, this is going to sound crazy. And then she put these yellow silk square pillows on top of that with like a white trim sort of Greek key. And it sounds like it shouldn't work together at all. And yet somehow it's all great and really different. And it is this really noticeable pop in the room. And it's very different palette wise from almost everything else, but somehow it's perfect.
Isn't it incredible what designers can see that the rest of us are like, there's just no way that that's going to work?
I would never have put that together. You're right.
And I also think that they just have the access, right, to the showrooms, to the markets, like you said, Pia, that, you know, if you're not in the trade, you just don't see that quantity or that level of product that they do. And I think that's why homes that are designed with the assistance of a professional just have that extra layer of glamour or personality and beauty. Pia, how about you? Is there something in your home that you look at and think to yourself, oh gosh, if not for the designer, I would not have made that selection?
So it is our smallest room in our house is the study. We now call it the black room because when she came in, it was actually the last room that we had designed because I didn't know what to do with it. My husband already had an office and it's just this little tiny bookshelved wood paneled room. And she came in and said it was pretty much empty with leftover furniture. And she said, we're going to recover these. We're going to repurpose, which I love, these love seats. We're going to paint the walls. We're going to shellac them black. Now, this was 10 years ago. And I'm looking at this wood and I'm saying, you can't undo that. She goes, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. And there's this big picture window there. So it has a lot of light. So I'm picturing this room now dark and I can't. And then she repurposed the love seats into a velvet lavender, which my house at that time now was all whites, grays, and light blues. So I can't picture all this color and these chartreuse pillows. And it is everyone in our family's favorite room. And it's the coziest room and we love it. And to this day, it's probably the only room that I haven't started to redo. It probably needs to be redone because it's got a lot of wear and tear. But as far as the aesthetic of it, I don't want to touch it. It's just so cozy. And at any point in time, there's someone in our family just sitting in the black room or hiding.
Depending on what's going on in the house. So we're not going to talk about costs and prices, but we do all agree that working with a designer is an investment.
Yes.
How do you see that? How did you wrap your head around that concept? And was there negotiating at home, with your husbands in terms of getting them on board? I'm curious how that worked out.
Oh, yes. We agreed before we even had a meeting with her to the budget so that there wouldn't be a discussion in front of her about it. I say this, no, you say that. And I did have to do some convincing because it's a pricey process. It is, as you say, an investment. But I think that the justification, the motivation for both of us was, if we do it right and we pick someone who is really talented as she was, we'll have this room for 10 plus years. We won't touch it for 10 plus years. And so that, if you amortize the cost of using her over the price of that 10-year period or 10 plus years, it isn't, if you look at it in that light, it isn't an unreasonable investment. And this is totally subjective, but I think another thing for us that was helpful was this particular designer gives you sort of a fixed rate, a flat rate that you pay for her time and her energy and her efforts for the duration of the project. And that was appealing to us because we had never done this before and we didn't know how long it would take. And our large rooms and the scope of the project was somewhat large. There are a lot of designers that do an hourly, and I think my sense of it is if you have a smaller project, that makes sense. But for a larger project, our feeling was that could really get away from us. That could really spiral.
How about you?
I agree. My designer, she knows me. We've been together now 9 years. She knows more or less what my budget is, and she will come in at times, and I'm so glad because she goes, there's a lot of your budget, but it's a total splurge, and I think you're going to love it. And we just did it with my powder room wallpaper, and it is stunning, and I love it. And she knows, you don't need a lot of wallpaper in that room. So if you're going to splurge, this is the time to do it. And she's very good at presenting different levels of budget. So, we're doing lighting through the house, which is what we're doing right now. She'll say, let's switch out this, and here's one. But if you don't like that, here's another option too. And they're all very comparable, but she does give you the option of here's an investment piece. Here's something that's worth your while to invest in, or, not.
Right. And so surprisingly, I didn't realize this until we were chatting before the podcast. The two of you are embarking or have somewhat recently embarked on a new project at home. And so I would love for you to share a little bit about what you have in mind for the next phase of your house.
Well, we're talking to her about the dining room now, and we want to redo. We have a red wall and then a chair rail, and then it's white from there down. And when we moved to St. Louis, I really wanted a red dining room, and I loved it, and I've enjoyed it. But it's reached the end of its enjoyment for me. I'm tired of it now, and I'm ready for something different. So we're talking about wallpapers with her, and we like sort of a naturalistic vibe, something sort of in the Gracie or de Gournay family. And so the debate right now is, would we wallpaper from the chair rail up or the whole way down and then paint the chair rail a complementary shade? Because she says that would make the ceilings appear higher, which is a neat trick. And then we're going to do a curtain of some sort. We have a huge bay window in the dining room with some sort of a tape. I love. Who doesn't love tape on a curtain? And we'll probably do sconces somewhere that complement the chandelier. I don't want to move the chandelier. I love it. So we've got to find something that works with it. And we've also got to figure out which wall makes the most sense for the sconces. But the room's a little dark, so I want just a little more light in the space. And she, as usual, is very gracious because I have a number of antiques in there. We have a really good Oriental on the floor in there, and then we don't want to remove that, so she's going to work with that too.
Wonderful. Sounds great. Pia, how about you? What's going on at your house?
A lot. We are putting on an addition. So there's a lot of construction, a lot of mud. It's a screened porch, which I've always wanted. We have a very old house, and I just wanted to have sort of an outdoor space, but I wanted to be true to the house. So we're putting on a screened porch, and my designer's been great. Right now, it's a bit of a fire drill. So when you were talking about communicating and how you communicate, well, I've sent her 3 DMs on Instagram, text, phone calls, and even, I think yesterday she came over and spent an hour and a half because I said the foreman wants to know what the specs on the sconces are outside. Well, we didn't have sconces outside yet because they're still digging and everything. I didn't realize they're going to need it. So we spent some time and we found the right sconce, and she's been great.
So final question. If a friend were to ask you, why should I hire an interior designer? What would you tell them, Sydney?
Oh, I just think it expands the sort of possibilities of what you can do with the space. Unless you have like a fine arts background or a design background, you may not be able to envision some of the ideas that they'll bring to you. And they can be so clever or beautiful. We had a yellow paint in our living room before she redid it. And at certain times of day, it would have a greenish hue to it. And she said that there are green undertones in yellow that the sunlight was pulling out. And that explained why at various times of day, the room was not particularly pretty or pleasant. And how on earth would I ever have known that? So she put this sort of gray, warm gray in the room with bluish undertones. And this sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually much warmer now. And no matter what time of day you go in the room, it's beautiful. And she put a grass cloth wallpaper on the ceiling in the den that is so much fun. I would never, ever have thought to do something like that. And it is one of the first things people notice and comment on when they walk in our den. And then to kind of offset that, she put this crazy sort of natural thick yarn fringe on these huge square pillows on the chairs in the den that has sort of that same tactile coastal feel as the ceiling, but without being too coastal in reference since we live in the Midwest. But I don't know, I just think that the benefit would be you can just take the room to sort of another level in terms of whatever it is that your objective might be, feeling warm and cozy or feeling formal and impressive or feeling maybe sort of like a certain style, of design. But I don't know that without any formal training, you could achieve that level of beauty and perfection on your own.
Agreed. I'm totally in agreement with you, Sydney.
Yeah.
Pia, what do you think?
I would add to that their industry expertise. I mean, they are day in and day out at the, design and detail and to the trade. They're going to their markets. They see it. And even if they're not shopping for you specifically, they have you in their head. So they might be out looking for a couch for a client and see something else that comes to mind. So access to that and just fresh eyes and really creating a cohesiveness in your home that goes from room to room, because I have a tendency to pick up something on vacation and want to have it there because it's meaningful to me, but it stands out. And they can be really, really great at just coming in and seeing your space with fresh eyes and make it cohesive.
It's wonderful. All right, ladies. Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It was fun.
This is fun.
Good.
Yeah, I agree.
And now on to V's Views. Congratulations are in order for Lauren Sweet Schuler. Lauren's exhibiting a selection of her interior design projects at Merrimack Community College. A legacy of design celebrating the applied arts at Merrimack will be on display at the Contemporary Art Gallery there from February 27th through March 27th. You can see Lauren's work as well as that of 20 other distinguished alumni. On March 13th from 5 to 8 p.m., Frizella Landscape Group in Defiance is hosting a Meet the Designers Night, featuring their award-winning landscape architecture and design team. You can talk with the experts, gain inspiration, and gather valuable insights for your home. Don't miss the company's exclusive presentation about the top landscape design trends for 2025. And the Architect and Designer Awards Party is taking place on April 1st at Contemporary Art Museum from 5:30 to 8:30. Find out who this year's winners will be in more than 25 categories, including House of the Year and Best of Outdoor Living. Thanks for listening to the House of Lou podcast. Be sure to follow us and share the episodes with your friends. Be in touch. Subscribe to our design and home newsletter at stlmag.com/newsletters and follow along on Instagram at St. Louis Mag. You can follow me at VT Lookbook. If you loved what you heard, show us some love by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you choose to listen. We'll see you next time. And just remember, there's so much to see in St. Louis if you know where to look.